For several decades, America's comic book industry was not allowed to grow and was kept at a very immature level because of censorship. The censorship did not come from the government, it came from the industry itself through something we now call the Comics Code Authority. In order to understand how this thing came into being, you gotta understand how America was like back then. You see, they were suffering through a wave of delinquency. A lot of children ended up being criminals. The reason for this is that America just got out of World War II, and so a lot of kids grew up without a father. And parents tried to find a very simple, basic explanation for that. And usually, parents don't like to be told that it's their own fault and it's their bad parenting. And so they require scapegoats. And as any good censorship in America, it doesn't come from a religious institution. It doesn't come from a preacher or a pastor. It comes from the academia. You see, back then, there was this doctor by the name of Frederick Wertham, a psychiatrist. And in 1954, he published his book called The Seduction of Innocent. And in The Seduction of the Innocent, he explains that the reason that children are criminal is due to reading comic books. He considers comic books to be a disease of the eye. And in his research, he says that Wonder Woman is problematic because it's a strong woman that's like a lesbian. And there's a lot of subtlety to bondage, and it causes kids to become degenerates. There's problems with Batman and Robin because it promotes homosexuality and grooming. And he also compared Superman to being both un-American and fascistic. Now, despite the fact that everything I said sounds a little bit ridiculous, this was a bestseller in 1954. And it got an extremely high number of parents concerned. Now, social media didn't exist back then, but concerned citizen letters was a thing. And many parents had various advocacy groups, and there were activists that took donations from those parents, specifically in order to raise up a fuss. And this was enough to spook the comic book industry. And this is where the comic book industry comes up with the Comics Code Authority. Now, it's important to point out that while America does have free speech, they also have this thing called obscenity laws. Obscenity laws don't exist in every single European nation, so like a lot of us don't really have a comparison. But back then, obscenity laws were treating stuff of sexual nature, as well as stuff that has a lot of violence or gore. And they were up for the interpretation of a judge. What this means is that any type of business, any type of store that would have comic books could risk getting the ire from activists or from concerned parents, and it could actually escalate into a public scandal where the cops could genuinely come in and try to see if the comic books themselves don't have any obscenity in them, which could lead the person arrested and the store closed. And so in order to avoid that, a lot of store owners became very concerned and refused to sell any other type of comics than the ones that had the approved by the Comics Code of Authority. And so the question is like, well, what exactly was the Comics Code of Authority? And while a lot of people today may say, well, that was so fucking based, you gotta understand that the reason for this was to stop delinquency. And despite the fact that comic books did censor, there is no correlation with the stopping of delinquency. In other words, politicians, instead of actually fixing the problem, which was fatherlessness, they decided to go after some petty shit. The activists also distracted the public by going after petty shit like comic books. And the only thing that suffered was the industry itself. As we can see, certain things that weren't allowed would be females being drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities. In other words, many of the things that Anita Sarkeesian would later want for gaming was found here. Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with zombies, vampires, vampirism, ghouls, cannibals, werewolves would be prohibited. Profanity, the use of word fuck, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, words or symbols which have acquired undesirable meanings are forbidden. Nudity with meretricious purpose and salacious posture shall not be permitted. Illicit sex relations, policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in a way as to create disrespect for the established authority. So, in other words, you wouldn't be able to have Batman with Gotham City with corrupt police officers and all of that. No comic book magazine shall use the word horror or terror. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrated shall be eliminated. Now, this is why comic books got a reputation as being for children, specifically because both themes that adults would enjoy with complex characters or great issues or anything that would make you think wasn't allowed. And it's also why you don't really see a lot of independent creators in America during the comic book age. It's also why you see a lot of superhero comics and almost nothing else. It's because people were afraid to invest money into something so that once it's finished, it doesn't get the seal of approval and then no one wants to buy it. Meanwhile, if you look at Japan, their manga industry was booming. A lot of independent creators, various themes, and manga and anime didn't have this reputation that it's for children. Right? And it's interesting because even in America, in the beginning, comic books and especially cartoons weren't for children. Like, they were placed in cinema and adults would view them, and later on they become for children as the academics create this moral panic in society and everything becomes sanitized for a couple of decades. What's also interesting is that this is happening during the war on drugs, and the government wanted to reach those kids, and what better way to do that if not through comics? And so they wanted a comic where kids understand why drugs are bad. Unfortunately, no one would pick something like that up because they knew they wouldn't get the seal of approval. The person that did do it was Stan Lee, and he made the Spider-Man comic, which tackled this issue. That was actually sold in stores, but it's easy to understand why. You see, stores would only sell comic books with the seal of approval because they would know that there's nothing in there that the government would take offense on. And so if you have a comic book that's actually commissioned by the government, even if it doesn't have the seal of approval, there's no way that the government itself would arrest the store owner for, having obscenity in that comic that the government itself commissioned. And so this nonsense lasts all the way up until the early 2000s when comic book creators managed to bypass the publishers, and they managed to bypass some of the major stores. And all of a sudden it becomes irrelevant. And I think like that is one of the best ages, at least from my take, when it comes to comic books. You have like 10 years or 15 years or so of really good storytelling. Some of the best Marvel comics come during that time. Like, for instance, Marvel Civil War, the first one, the Infinity Wars. DC Comics manages to come up with new versions of Batman, Batman Beyond, like all these cool things, all these cool comics with rich characters, deep plot lines. They come during that period. And also all the successful Marvel movies were inspired from those comics. Unfortunately, however, it's not meant to last because you get the Me Too movement, and you also have the social justice movement, which assaulted the comic book industry with various unfounded allegations of rape culture, sexual misconduct, bigotry, racism, and they managed to get a lot of the talent fired. And the comic book industry, in order to stop the activists from flinging these accusations at them, they invited them in as consultants, as part of the HR. And they also did this in order to get cheap ESG loans, in order to get government grants from certain countries. And that's a story for another time. But basically, censorship seems to be eternal. It's unfortunate how it spreads. And the only time when censorship didn't exist, in my opinion, society didn't get destroyed. People didn't die. We actually got some really good entertainment for a while. until it was taken over by another group of moral busybodies. Let me know what you guys think, and as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.